Hi, Bailey. Okay, let's go ahead and get. Should I go ahead and start, Brenda, or do you want to kick off and then I'll introduce to the introductions, or should I just go ahead and start off?
Yeah, you can start off.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining our second session, our second speaker session of this semester. We're really excited today because we have Dr. Ebony Utley, who was one of our speakers, and that was the first time I experienced her session was last semester, and we're so excited and honored to have her back. So I've been looking forward to this session, and those who will be joining, from the pre-recorded session or listening to the recording, you guys are in for a treat as well. A little bit about Dr. Ebony Utley. She's a professor at Cal State Long Beach, but she's really not just a professor, she's a professorpreneur, right? So she's not only a teacher, researcher, but she's also an entrepreneur. You can actually hear her discussions and talks in many different ways. She's in print, radio, she has online, and she's featured not only here in the US, but she's known internationally as well. She's also an entrepreneur, and that's really something I think that's really interesting because a lot of people think they teach entrepreneurship, but have never done it. So now you have an actual teacher that has done it, and that's really an exciting combo. She basically curates experiences and develops technology products for social impact. She co-founded Ensemble Innovation. It's a tech equity venture studio. And she also has other projects, including being the associate director of the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And she also founded the Social Justice Entrepreneurship Program at Cal State Long Beach, right? And then this is something that we here at El Camino are very excited about because we want people who are not always seen as, the pool for becoming entrepreneurs, become entrepreneurs and have that, not only that the skills, but the encouragement here as well. And we're really honored to have Dr. Utley with us. She's also an honorary fellow in entrepreneurship at the Sagacor Cave Hill School of Business and Management at the University of the West Indies. So we're excited to have Dr. Utley with us. This is going to be our second of four sessions that we're going to have for the speaker series. And Dr. Utley is going to be back again to speak to us about persuasive pitch. But today she's going to talk about sustainable innovation. And this is going to be interesting. I'm excited to hear because she's going to really encompass a lot of different things in her discussion that really would resonate with a lot of us, whether it's our age, gender, our background, our environment that we come from. So I'm really looking forward to this and how that innovation could be sustainable as we as a society too. So, she's a thought leader. So I'd love to hear her thoughts. And that's why I'm going to stop talking and let her go for it. So Dr. Utley, please take it away.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate that. I always appreciate a high energy introduction. It gets me pumped and ready to go for the presentation. I almost panicked a little bit when I saw mental health and burnout. I was like, oh, I can talk about that, but that's not what I planned for today. So I'm glad that we're all on track for sustainable innovation as our topic for today. And I know that we are just a handful at this moment. Bailey and Vanessa, welcome. And whoever's joining us via phone, welcome as well. Dr. Galvez, did you have some announcements that you wanted to make prior to getting started, or are we
We're
good?
doing announcements at the end.
Okay, at the end. All right, then let me share my screen. And we'll get started here. Sustainable innovation, how to develop products for people, the planet, and profit. So Vanessa and Bailey, if you wouldn't mind telling me in the chat, do you have any business ideas as of yet? Do you have any products that are in the making, or are we still in the ideation stage? Okay, so Bailey says no, not currently. That's absolutely fine. And anyone else on the call? Vanessa also do not. Okay, that is good to know. Yes, so Bailey wants to make a business, but not sure what to do yet. And maybe this presentation can help you do that. So I always like to start with definitions, right? So my favorite definition of sustainability is the need to ensure a better quality life for all, now and into the future, in a just and equitable manner, whilst living within the limits of the supporting ecosystems. It's a short definition, but there are so many components in there that are really essential to understanding sustainability. First, I like to emphasize the all portion, right? Ensuring a better quality of life for everyone. Also, I'd like to emphasize the time component, now and into the future, which reminds us that the decisions we make now will have implications for our future. Other keywords are just and equitable. We want to be fair. We mentioned the introduction that I'm a founder of our social justice entrepreneurship program at Cal State Long Beach, where justice and equitability are so important to us. So we want to create this equitable, fair world in the future, but we know that we still have the limits of our supporting ecosystems. And sometimes those ecosystems are environmental, they're geographical. Sometimes those ecosystems are social, based upon our networks and the connections that we have. So when we think about sustainability, we've got to think about people, we've got to think about time, we've got to think about processes, and we also have to think about our limits. When we talk about sustainability, I also want to distinguish between two really important things. When we're talking about sustainability, we have to ask, are we sustaining life or are we sustaining a quality of life? So when we're sustaining life, we're helping people survive: food, water, electricity, internet access. When we're sustaining a quality of life, we're just kind of building and sustaining things to make our life better, but aren't necessarily necessary. So I like to say with my students, if we're sustaining life, we are providing aspirins, something that you have to have when you're in pain. If we're sustaining quality of life, then we're providing vitamins, things that are nice to have, right? They make our life better, but they aren't absolutely necessary. So let me present this to you in another way. So if you are familiar with sustainability at all, then you're probably familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, right? And these are global Sustainable Development Goals. So we have no poverty, no hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, renewable energy, good jobs and economic growth, innovation and infrastructure, required inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace and justice, and partnerships for these goals. When we're thinking about these 17 goals, we're thinking about ways to sustain life. These are things that people need, right, on a daily basis to achieve their highest form of humanity, right? But if we're thinking about things that sustain quality of life, then we might be thinking more of ESGs, and maybe you've heard of ESGs. They're very popular. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. So environmental factors refer to a company's impact on the environment. So maybe it's greenhouse gases, emissions, energy use, packaging, waste management, these sorts of things. They're very important, but they're not as important as eliminating poverty or creating parity amongst genders, right? These businesses are sustaining our quality of life, and when we input an environmental factor, we ask them to be more responsible in their relationship to the environment. A social factor, got this little image of people here, has to do with people, how a company treats its employees and operates in society. So if you're familiar with DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, that's what goes there under social. Labor standards, employee well-being, racial justice, pay equity, human rights, community relations, workplace safety, supply chain management, all of that goes in the social category. We can also think about data protection, privacy, and security in the social category. Absolutely important stuff, right? But stuff that we can get to after we've sustained life, right? Data protection and cybersecurity is not going to mean as much to you if you don't know where your next meal is coming from. And then we have governance. And so governance encompasses a company's internal structures, like their processes and procedures, how they make decisions on how they're going to do things, what the representation on the board is, how they hire board members, how they do risk management, how they do compliance, executive compensation, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, these sorts of things. Again, very, very important, but you worry about anti-corruption when you've been able to form a company, after you've been able to have the resources to form said company because you've got water, power, electricity, internet access, et cetera, right? Okay, so now I have a question for you in the chat. Now that we've talked about the difference between sustaining life and sustaining quality of life, Tell me something in the chat that sustains your life. Something that you absolutely have to have. Like if you don't have it, you can't be your fully functioning self. Something that sustains your life. And I'll give you a hint. So in low light conditions, for me, it's my glasses. I can't see. I can't see anything. I can't see or read, can't make decisions. I just can't see, right? So that is something, having those glasses in low light conditions is what's sustaining my life. Driving, everything else is going to be compromised if I can't see, right? So for someone else, those glasses might be quality of life because they're using them for fashion. It's clear lenses, they don't need them to see. Sustaining my life because I have to have them, but sustaining quality of life for someone else if they're just fashion glasses and they don't need them to see. Okay, so we have something in the chat. Something that sustains me would be my phone. my like comparable for that is internet access, right? If I don't have internet access, I can't be my full self. Like it just can't do it, right? So yes, I can agree with you how your phone might be something that sustains your life. But for other people in other circumstances where they don't have internet access or they don't have smartphones, then that might be quality of life for them in ways that it's sustaining life for us in Southern California. Morning walk to set the tone for the day. Absolutely, right? And that might be sustaining your life because it's something that you need to get going, to center, to be grounded, right? But for someone who has mobility issues, like that's not as important to them, right? A walk might be a quality of life situation as opposed to something that's necessary. Something that sustains your life is your bed, right? Okay. In our environment, being able to sleep comfortably at night in a bed is absolutely something that we need. But in other environments, in other cultures, there are people that sleep on the ground, right? And sleeping on the ground is the preference. It's the cultural, historical means of resting in the evenings. Perhaps for some people, it's better for their back to be on a completely hard surface as opposed to being in the bed. My point here is that sustainability means different things to different people in different places in different times. And if we're going to talk about sustainability and innovation, we have to appreciate difference. And that is essentially what the rest of my talk is about. Understanding that difference is very important, and what something means to you is not necessarily what it's going to mean to your customers or to your colleagues or to your family, friends, other allies. So let's jump in. When I talk to you about sustainability today, I like alliteration and I like threes. So we're going to talk about sustainability in terms of people, planet, and profit. And there are lots of ways that other people break down sustainability. If you like ease, you can think about it in terms of equality and the environment and the economy. Some people think about sustainability in terms of time, and we hinted at this in our definition in terms of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But today we're going to focus on the 3 Ps and the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. Personally, I always put people first because people are the decision makers. And what people decide to do will impact the planet and will also impact their profits. I know that we're a small group today, but I've got segments bracketed out for questions where I'm super happy to have you unmute and ask your questions. I'm also happy to have you participate in the chat. I'm monitoring the chat. Dr. Galvez is monitoring the chat. So anytime you want to put in a comment or a question in the chat, feel free to do so as well. Okay, so a little bit more about me outside of my professional biography. Like, why do I care about sustainable innovation? One of the reasons I care is because I have an invisible disability, which makes sometimes it very difficult for me to be mobile. And it wasn't until that happened to me that I started paying attention to all of the missed opportunities to support people that have mobility issues. So for example, I was having a mobility issue. I was out in the world. I went to a public museum because I needed to use the restroom. I also needed to rest, right? Museums are great for resting. They've got air conditioning, they got food, they've got art, they've got everything, they've got benches, everything you need. I was like, I'm good to go. Except when I needed to use the restroom, the elevator was out and it was only stairs. And I couldn't make it down the stairs. And no one in the museum seemed to think that this was a problem. And I was like, well, this is something that we should probably consider, right? So you might have one of those moments where you've got some sort of condition that might not be obvious to other people, and you realize, wow, like my life is really limited, or there's certain things I can't do, certain places that I can't go because of this condition. That's what happened to me. So that's one of the first ways that I got interested. And that had to do with sustaining my life. In terms of sustaining my quality of life, I love to travel, and I travel a lot. And I realized that a lot of things that sustain my life here are just sustaining the quality of life in other places, right? So I absolutely have to have a smartphone. I have to have a signal everywhere I go when I travel. Otherwise, I feel like it's not safe. Like I can't Google directions to get from A to B. Like I can't translate different languages. I can't let my friends know where I am on WhatsApp. But then when I come to other places, some people don't have smartphones at all. They're still using flip phones. They're not able to text, and that is normal for them, right? So noticing those differences was important to me. Also, I love technology. I love to play in headsets. I bought a VR headset. It happened to not fit over my hair. I was like, no one who designs VR, think about what that means for people that wear head wraps, perhaps for religious reasons, or people that have big curly hair. Oftentimes, I'm evaluating businesses as part of Ensemble, or I'm on websites and I look at the website and I don't see anyone that looks like me. And my first thought is, well, this must not be for me if there's no one here that looks like me. If there's no one who thought we should have more representation on the website, then it's probably not something I want to engage in. So when I'm developing products, I'm always thinking about who's not represented and how I might be able to accommodate and include them. So why do I think you should care? Well, I'm hoping it's because who you are. When I meet the next generation of innovators, most of them are more inclusive and more accepting than the previous generations. There's no disrespect to previous generations. I'm just saying, in my personal experience, this has kind of been the case, and I want to put you all in that category. Why else should you care? Because it's the right thing to do, right? It's the right thing to do to appreciate difference and to be as inclusive as you possibly can, especially when you're building a product that you want to put out in the world and serve as many people as possible. And the more inclusive you can be, it will ultimately increase your target market and increase your profits. And we'll get to those details in a little bit here. So tell me in the chat, are there other reasons why you are here that we haven't discussed? Other reasons that you care that we haven't discussed? And welcome to the folks who just joined us. Other reasons why you care, other reasons that you showed up today. I know the chat lag is real, right? Waiting for folks to type. Behind this, I have another question for you. Okay, we can think about two questions at the same time. My second question is, if you had a magic wand, I'm giving you a magic wand, and you could build any project in the world, you have unlimited resources. You could build any project in the world to sustain life, what would you build? Question two, I'm giving you a magic wand, and if you could build anything, any project, any product, unlimited resources that would sustain life, what would you build? I know for me, I would find a way to make sure that everyone had free and consistent Wi-Fi all the time, whether it's satellites or hot air balloons or, I don't know, something connected to your physical body. I would build something so you could always be connected to the internet anytime you needed to, anywhere in the world. You could also disconnect it from yourself anytime you needed to. Okay. Bailey would build a food distribution system. Awesome. Victoria would make sure that everyone had housing. Brenda Galvez would make sure that there was a free healthcare system. Vanessa also reminds us that she's open-minded, and that's why she's here, and that's why she cares. Very good. A collaboration tool that can interpret and help people communicate clearly and with the best intentions so we eliminate conflict from misunderstandings. Awesome. I love all these ideas. I just wanted to point out that all these ideas can be facilitated through the internet access. So I'm just saying, if we put them all together and we always have internet access, then we can have access to the healthcare when we need it. We would know where housing was available. We could have our food distribution system, and we could eliminate conflicts from all of our conversations. Excellent. All right, we will come back to this list. I also invite you, if there's anything that you love on our list, to give it an emoji, to give it a thumbs up, to give it a smiley face. If there's something that you absolutely love on our list here, just give it some emoji love. I'm doing that as well. Okay, and we will come back to these. All right, so let's get started with the tripartite, right? Let's start with people. So I put this image up here to remind you there are people. You see the folks on the left, the only white folks on the left. First, we have only white men in suits. And then second, we've got younger white people, we've got women and 2 men, but also very blonde, very white. So we have people on the left and we have people on the right. On the upper right, we've got people of color. Many of them are in wheelchairs. We've got people of different colors represented here. In the bottom, we also have more diversity. We've got people of different ages. We've got people of different genders. We've got people of different colors. And so when we're designing for people, it's really important to understand that there are people and there are people. And my example before, I said, if I don't see anyone that looks like me, I often feel excluded. And maybe you've had this experience too, right? Or maybe you showed up someplace and there wasn't anyone that spoke your language or anyone that was from the same type of neighborhood. And you felt that moment like, wait, do I belong here? The answer is yes, you belong wherever you want to go. And people could have made an effort to be more inclusive, right? To make more people feel more comfortable in the space. And so that's what we're talking about here with people. So my next slide talks a little bit about gender identity, right? If we're talking about sex, we're talking about a biological category. We're talking about anatomy, hormones, chromosomes, male, female, intersex. But if we're talking about gender, we're talking about a set of socially constructed expectations based on our sex categories. And when I say something is socially constructed, I mean it is the way it is because a group of people in society have agreed that it should be that way. Another example that I like to give is that when a baby is born and the doctor says it's a boy or it's a girl, they're talking about sex. And when they put that baby in a blue or a pink blanket, then we're talking about gender. And your gender identity is how a person thinks about themselves, how they label themselves in terms of their womanness or their manness or their cisgenderness, when your gender identity conforms with your biological sex, or your transgenderness, when your gender identity does not conform with your biological sex, right? And then your gender expression is how you present yourself in terms of androgyny or masculinity or femininity. So I like the gender unicorn because, well, first, we just used to think of polar opposites. Is, well, masculine or feminine, and that's it in terms of gender expression. But now we have an understanding of gender, gender identity, and gender expressions. And they used to occur on a continuum. So maybe we had masculinity all the way to the left, and we had femininity all the way to the right, and you could put yourself on a slider in between. But the gender unicorn suggests that we could start at ground zero for everything. And so in terms of your gender identity, you could put yourself closer to the left. When it comes to female, you could also put yourself close to the left. When it comes to male, you could put yourself close to the left when it comes to other genders. So now we have more flexibility when it comes to gender identity. The same for who you're physically attracted to. Separating physical attraction from emotional attraction is also very cool, right? Because you might be emotionally attracted to a particular gender, but not physically attracted. Or maybe you're emotionally attracted to multiple genders, but not physically attracted. The moral of the story is we've got more room than we've ever had before culturally for understanding gender identity. So not only do I want you to think about your gender identity in these nuanced ways, but think about how other people might be thinking about their gender identity in these nuanced ways and how you can include them and make room for them when you're building your own products. So this is a screenshot from OkCupid, and it was one of the most progressive ones I've ever seen in terms of representing gender identity. Look at all of these options here, right? It makes me really happy to see all of these options, even if I only want to pick one for myself, to know that there's a company building a product that's making room for different gender identities. This is something that I encourage you to do, whether you're building a product or making a survey or just trying to be more inclusive in your language when you're welcoming people. It's very important for people to know that, hey, I've thought about this. I might not always get it right. Maybe I've left someone out. Maybe there's an identity that could be here, but not here, but I'm trying to be as representative as possible. So when it comes to people and gender identity, questions that you can ask yourself are, which genders represent your target audience? How have you appealed to them? Have you unintentionally excluded anyone? Does your product use gender inclusive language? Does it talk about genders, plural? Does your product make room for people to include their own pronouns? If your product is representing couples in any way, are those couples always heterosexual couples? Are they always same-sex couples? Is it always dyads when you're talking about relationships? How can you be more inclusive? Finally, how can your product become safer for all genders to use? Are you building something that might out transgender users via a public history of profile changes? Or are you requiring someone to use a potentially dead name that they no longer want to use in public? Could there be users that upload sexually explicit content to your product, your site, or your website that you're building? Do you have a policy for that? Is any gender going to be subject to harassment contingent upon what you're building or how you're building it? So believe it or not, up until 2016, if you told Siri that you had been sexually assaulted or abused, Siri would respond, I don't know what that is. That's a big fail when it comes to sustainable innovation and gender identity. Up until 2016, we can assume that mostly men who were building Siri and building the product were not thinking about sexual assault or sexual abuse scenarios because Siri wasn't able to recognize it at all. When it comes to people, we also need to talk about race and ethnicity. Race is an unreal construct with very real effects. So again, race is socially constructed. It is the way it is because we've agreed in our society that it's going to be that way, but other societies understand race differently. But a race is a group of people that have a common history, nationality, language, geographical location, and that is generally represented or transmitted in their physical attributes. So the color of their skin, maybe the texture of their hair, maybe the shapes of their noses or lips. It's genetic, a genetic representation. The genetic representation is attributed to physical characteristics, again, in a socially constructed way. Society has agreed that race is going to be represented by the way certain groups of people wear their hair or the color of their skin. Ethnicity, on the other hand, is a social classification based on your nationality, your religion, your language, your ancestral heritage, people who, again, might share a common geographical origin. But you can see on my chart here, whereas race is a broad category, ethnicity is very specific. You might think you can identify someone's race by the color of their skin, but ethnicity, their nationality, the language that they speak, their religious background, is going to be much less easily identifiable. Again, if race is something that we can see, ethnicity is something that we can't necessarily see. We're going to have to get to know people, have to have conversations with them to understand their ethnicity. So if race is a label imposed by outsiders, then ethnicity would be a label chosen by insiders. So if the race is Latino, Latina, Latine, Latinx, the label chosen by insiders might be Mexican or El Salvadorian or Spanish. Again, something that you might not be able to guess, right? Unless you got to know them a little bit better. If Asian is the broad category of race, label chosen by insiders might be Korean, Japanese, Taiwanese. Okay? And so I was looking for a lowercase b in my Canva here, and all I found was this Christmas situation, but I needed a lowercase b to distinguish between Blacks when it comes to race and a capital B with Blacks when it comes to ethnicity. Blacks with a lowercase b is designated to represent the diaspora, anyone from the African diaspora. Again, it's a broad category, label imposed by outsiders. But a label chosen by insiders would be Black with a capital B that represents Black Americans from the United States. But someone who is Barbadian or St. Lucian or South African, that would be an ethnicity, a label chosen by the insiders. So I encourage you to, again, have those conversations, get to know people, and represent folks in terms of their ethnicity as much as possible, as opposed to the broad categories of race. So questions you might ask yourself when you're building sustainable innovation for people in race and ethnicity is, how can you increase racial and ethnic diversity in your team as well as your marketing materials? So it isn't obvious that you're leaving someone out, but also the more diversity that you have in your team, the more diversity that team can incorporate into what it is that you're building. And then I just found this over the weekend, because I can't have this talk and not talk about AI, but how might your product exhibit racial bias? I didn't even have to search for this, y'all. It was on the homepage of emoji.is in case you want to send them some messages and let them know about their racial discrimination here. But we've got an image of a Black person that's labeled a nigger, because AI, right, who's been trained by people that aren't, I'm guessing, that aren't represented by Blacks in the diaspora, that this is what comes out. Also, Texas Freedom Dumb, that's another problematic image here. But the app was designed to generate cartoon characters for whatever it is you type in the box. But that app is only as smart as its algorithm, and that algorithm is only as inclusive as the people who built the algorithm. And if the people who built the algorithm aren't representative in terms of different races and different ethnicities, then we're going to end up with more of this. When it comes to people, we've got to talk about age. What do you notice about this screenshot? Like, what seems different? This is from the National Institutes of Health, but what seems different on this screenshot that you might not see on any other web page? And of course, our hint is that we're talking about age. But what do you notice here? Okay, I'll give you some hints in the interest of time, but we've got the ability to resize text, to change the color contrast. If you notice, the text is pretty big on the screen. So you could resize the text, you could change the spacing, you could shift the color contrast. These are things that are important for individuals as they age. Again, my eyes are not what they were prior to the pandemic. For lots of older individuals, their eyes, I mean, it is a fact. Your eyesight will change over time as you age. Motor control sometimes also changes as you age. If you've got a little bit of a tremor, how to push those tiny buttons on the screen for the website to select different things. Accurate target selection becomes more difficult as you get older. So what can we do about that, right? We need to start thinking about how we might include older individuals in our product development, how we can make it easier for them to develop products. And on the flip side, we always need to be thinking about how we can protect children from exploitation. My niece and nephews, they love Roblox, and they're always talking about their friends on Roblox. And I'm just like, I'm pretty sure that person that you think is your 10-year-old friend is actually a 30-year-old male. Like, this is very suspect, right? But when we're building, we've got to think about that. How do we prevent adults from pretending to be children? And how do we keep our children safe on the apps, right? I just read a headline today that Utah is suing TikTok for making children addicted to the app, right? I don't know where the lawsuit will go. They just announced it today. It hasn't been to trial if it even makes it that far. But if you're building something like a TikTok, you've got to be thinking about those possibilities. You've got to be thinking about what you're going to do to keep people safe on your app. So for children, it might come down to safety. And for older individuals, it might come down to accessibility, being more easily used as people age. The good transition from age is to ability. The Americans with Disabilities Act describes someone who has a disability if they have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. 2, they have a history or a record of such impairment, as in they've had cancer that's in remission. And 3, they're perceived by others as having that impairment. There's this, for example, someone who has severe scars because of a burn. And so this data is a little older data, but it's from 2014, but it shows adults with self-reported impairments by age group. So again, the older we get, the more impairments we have, but it's also a reminder that younger people also have these impairments as well. So when we're designing, how do we design for hearing, vision, motor impairments? Designing for age is sometimes considered designing for everyone. So when you're designing for age and for ability, a good question to ask yourself is, how can your product become more accessible? Is there alt text for your images? Is the text that you're producing, can it be read by a screen reader? Is there audio description for people who might have sight limitations? Do you even know where the accessibility mode is on your phone or on your laptop? It's a great activity. If you have time, turn on accessibility on your phone, close your eyes and try to use it. Trust me, it's much better than it used to be, but it's still incredibly difficult to use most web pages and to use most apps. So for example, back in the day, BuzzFeed has a lot of images on their website. And if you would right click on an image, if you would look for its alt text, it would say image 1, image 2, image 3. And that means a screen reader can't tell anyone who has sight issues what's on the screen. So technology has developed considerably. Now there's AI, right, for your alt text. I used AI to use the alt text for these slides, but for example, the image that you're looking at now, it just says person using laptop. I mean, sure, that's accurate, but remember, AI is only as accurate as the algorithms that are programmed by humans. It's important for me in this image that the people are Black people because I want to be representative, but the AI erased that. So I had to go back in, type it in. Also, this is not just using a laptop, it's using a screen reader. And using a screen reader is important for the ability component that I wanted to add here. So I had to adjust my alt text to say 2 Black people, actually, a Black man and a Black woman using a laptop with a screen reader. So even though we can use the technology now to get the alt text, I encourage you to use the technology to get the alt text to be as specific as possible. So it's an accurate representation. Remember, if someone can't see the images that we're posting, we need to describe them in a way that's inclusive so they understand the differences or the nuances that we're trying to make. And then next, when it comes to people, I want to talk about access, right? Access to technology. This idea that technology is moving really quickly, and we'll talk about this again in a few minutes, but everyone doesn't have the newest technologies. So how can your product incorporate backwards compatibility? Meaning, if instead of having an iPhone 15, I have an iPhone 8, right? How can my iPhone 8 use some of the same components of the iPhone 15? Because some people just aren't going to be able to afford to make that jump, right? Questions you can ask yourself. Can your product provide Wi-Fi only or offline access in case someone doesn't have access to data? Because data isn't always free, broadband access isn't always free. So what can we do again to be more inclusive? And I've got the images of the Xboxes here, right? Because Xbox, right? Xbox X made enhancements to the older 360 games, but the older games could still be played with the new software and vice versa. There was backwards compatibility. That means there was someone on the team that was like, hey, we want to build this new thing. We want it to be fancy, but we also don't want to expect all of our loyal customers to be able to afford the new technology. So something you might not be as familiar with, WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, suggests that everything that we build on the web, also for mobile, must be perceivable, it must be robust, it must be operable, and it must be understandable. So that users can perceive the information on different devices, it must be robust enough to be interpreted by said devices, the user interface components and navigation must be operable, and it must be understandable to different users. It's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Some people argue that the web part is a little out of date because we are primarily mobile first these days, but the contents themselves are really good. And they have a great diagram that I will attach to this presentation so you'll have access to it later about the ways that you can use WCAG when you're building. W3C is a World Wide Web consortium, and they also develop standards and guidelines to help everyone on the web build based on the principles of accessibility, internationalization, privacy, and security. Again, noting that accessibility is first, because once we get accessible, then we can go global, then we can worry about data privacy, and we can worry about data security. Okay, so as promised, this is the first of our breaks. Would you like to unmute, ask any questions about any of our people content that we just discussed, or put additional questions into the chat? Anything you'd like to share? Okay, we'll keep going, but if something comes up, feel free to drop it in the chat. We're moving our attention now towards the planet, right? We talked about people. Now we're going to talk about planet. I'm going to show you a very, very brief clip from the Story of Stuff.
In the 1960s, Gordon Moore, the giant brain and semiconductor pioneer, predicted that electronics designers could double processor speed every 18 months. So far, he's been right. This is called Moore's Law. But somehow the bosses of these genius designers got it all twisted up. They seem to think that Moore's Law means every 18 months we have to throw out our old electronics and buy more. Problem is, the 18 months that we use these things are just a blip in their entire life cycle.
So I promised we would come back to that. And it's true, if you've ever had an iPhone and then got another iPhone, do you know exactly what I'm talking about? Exactly what I'm talking about, right? Every time I'm like, okay, I'm good with my iPhone, and they drop another one, and they drop another one, they drop another one, and then your battery starts to die, and you're like, but I've only had this phone a few years. Why is my battery dying? All of that is Moore's Law. And it's not just with our phones, but it's with our laptop, it's with our tablets, it's with all of our technology. Even old school things like your washing machine, your dishwasher, your dryer, you used to be able to buy it once and you can have it for like 40 years. Now, maybe it lasts you 10 years or so and it's going to wear itself out and you're going to have to get something new. That concept is called the extractive economy. And we live in an extraction economy that removes resources from people and from the planet to increase profits. Like doing this with my hand, increase profit, take out, right? It's all extracted. It doesn't put anything back. And so there are two visual representations here of this type of unsustainable development where people, planet, and profits are disconnected, right? Another way of thinking about it, if we think about capitalism, right? If we think about extraction strategies, if we think about governance, purpose and resources always being disconnected and taking out, then we're never going to build better in our community. So instead, I encourage you to think about a regenerative economy. Again, I'm doing this with my hands, right? Regenerative, we're building things, we're putting things together. You can see the difference here in sustainable development when there's overlap between people, planet, and profit. Oh, and I just realized that this little glitch with my graphic here. But in general, the regenerative economy is about resources, work, purpose, governance that's collective, a worldview that appreciates the interconnected of things. As long as our 3 Ps are interconnected, we're on our way to a regenerative mindset where things that we take out, we put back in and we allow them to recirculate. Which brings me to my next slide about the circular economy. It's a model of production and consumption that involves sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, recycling materials. And I've got this recycle image here with electronics and the arrows. Also, if you notice, I'm describing most of my graphics in case there's someone who's listening and can't see because they're driving, or there's someone that might have a visual impairment. That's my attempt to also be accessible throughout the presentation. So again, instead of just throwing something away, like could we share it, right? Could we fix it? Could we make it new again? There are several companies that have product take back programs now where you can take the products back. You can take your clothes. H&M was doing it for a while. Athleta is doing it for a while, right? You can send your clothes back. When you no longer want them, they will repurpose them. They will recycle them. But at the end of the day, recycling is like the last thing that we want to be doing, right? Because most things don't really get recycled. The things that just because it has a little triangle on it doesn't mean we can actually recycle it, even though we think that we can. And most of it ends up poisoning people who live in economically oppressed countries like China or Nigeria. We take a lot of our electronic waste and we just dump it in other countries, right? So recycling, it's not a bad thing, but it should be our last resort. Can we take it back to a company? For example, if I have tech, if I'm local, I take it to human IT. I take them my laptops, I take them tablets. If I have a phone, sometimes I send them off to secure the call. They recycle them for people in the military that need phones, people that are in hospice, and they need phones to connect with their loved ones. Amazon has a buyback program, so it's becoming increasingly popular to have these buyback programs. So if you're building a technology that you know is going to expire, can you also take back products, reuse, repair, refurbish? Also, when it comes to the planet, we need to talk about resource efficiency, and that means using the Earth's limited resources in a sustainable manner while minimizing as much as possible the impacts on the environment. So when we're talking about resource efficiency, can we use less water? Can we find ways to decrease the contamination in the water that we have? A simple thing to do, a lot of people will take their pills, right, and put them in the toilet or put them down the sink and use a garbage disposal, but could we throw them away instead, right? Or maybe sometimes we fill prescriptions and we don't have the intention of using them. We're like, well, we'll just fulfill it just in case. Maybe you don't need to fill the prescription at all until you're certain that you actually need it so that you won't have to dispose of it in a way that might not be beneficial for the planet. When it comes to energy consumption, can we assess and optimize our energy consumption? Can we do hybrid things sometimes, solar things other times? I rode in my first hydrogen-powered car the other day, and I was like, this is really cool. So it just runs on water, and the owner was like, basically, right? So I thought that that was very cool, making those types of decisions in our daily lives, but also when we're building things. Blockchain's amazing, right? Blockchain's amazing for people because it gives us an opportunity to have distributed ledgers and make transactions that are accounted for, but aren't tracked in the same way that we would through the banking system. And without contradiction, blockchain is terrible for the environment because the amount of electricity that's required to do the mining, right? So we have to think about, okay, sure, I would like to have some crypto, but how much is crypto hurting the environment? If I'm going to invest in a new crypto coin, can I invest in a coin that has found a way to use hydrogen power or solar power instead of traditional forms of electricity to mine the coin? This image here is for, my little bleaker here is for chemicals in industrial processes. So if you're building something that's going to involve chemicals, let's say you're doing a beauty product or you're doing soaps, right? Can you use the right chemicals in the right amounts? And then finally, resource efficiency, reuse, reduce, and recycle when we have to, so that we minimize the amount of subproducts required to build for our businesses. Questions to ask yourself about the planet. What impact does your product have on the planet? And trust me, even if you think it doesn't, it does. If you're building and your team always has to meet in person and you all have to drive and get there, those are CO2 emissions. Can we have more meetings online? I think with COVID, we've solved a little bit of that problem, right? Having more meetings online so that we're driving less, but travel has an impact on the planet. If you're using paper. We love to use Post-its to have brainstorming sessions and people post Post-its on the wall, but the sticky part of the Post-it is not recyclable. So can we use whiteboards instead? Can we use Jamboard or Miro? And whatever the impact is, how can you minimize that impact, right? Questions about the planet, how we can protect our planet, our responsibility to the planet, any holdover questions about people.
I have
Okay.
a question.
Yes.
How, if your business is not necessarily offering a product, but more so a service, how can you think about the planet? Would be my question.
It's a really good question, right? Because a lot of the inputs that we just talked about, like they don't apply to you if you're providing a service. But you can also always think about the people that you're serving with your service, right? So maybe you're just doing consulting and you do that on Zoom, right? So there are no CO2 emissions, like no one has to drive to meet each other. But as an added bonus, you could maybe do some investigating on what that company or what that other business is doing in terms of their implications on the planet and be like, hey, I just want to keep this in mind. Or one of the solutions that I'm bringing to you is a solution that would help you minimize your inputs as a company or with your team. So even though it's not a direct impact on the planet and the work that you do, you can apply your knowledge about sustainable innovation to help that company think more about their business's impact on the planet, if that makes sense. And let's say everybody's clean, like everybody's an online business, the consultant, like, and the company. And I don't know, no one can minimize electricity in their homes when they're on their calls or doing their business. Then we can perhaps focus more on people in terms of sustainable innovation then. But even now, I've got a light here and I've got a light here and I've got a light on over here. Do I need all these lights on for this presentation? I do not. But I didn't really think about it until just now. So now it's something that I'll think about in the future in terms of, again, minimizing my impact on the planet. Also, when you're recycling, right, whatever it is that you're building for someone else, if you're doing any work with paper and pens, I try to recycle my pens. Office Depot used to have a program where you have any markers or pens, they'll take them back. They have little boxes and they'll put them there. Household batteries. It used to be that the library had bins for AA, AAA batteries, and you just take them back to the library. So even those small things that you're using in your home, that you can still be more conscious of reduce, reuse, recycle when necessary. I also like the Buy Nothing Project. I think that's what it's called. They have an app where you can give away whatever it is you want to get away. You just press gift, put a picture up, talk about what you're giving away. There's so many books, school supplies, hair products, dishes, anything that you might have around the house that you're not using anymore, that you used to use for your business, but you don't need now. Someone will come by and pick it up for free. Sure, you can leave it on the curb, but then there's no telling what happens to it on the curb. But if someone is coming by your porch or by your job to pick it up and you know that they could reuse it, I had a pair of Beats headphones and they were slightly broken. They still worked, but like the head part was broken. And I was like, I can't be asked to do this. I put it on the Buy Nothing Project. This mom was like, I have 3 kids in online school. They'll be fine with it. I'm coming to get it now. Right? If I had thrown them away, they would have lived in the landfill for probably another 100 years as Beats headphones. But I was using them a lot for my business. It became untenable for me because it didn't sustain my quality of life. But for that mom that had 3 kids in COVID, like it sustained her life. I was able to give the other kid a pair of headphones that she didn't have to pay for. So you never know how what it is that you're no longer using could benefit someone else. Okay, let's talk about profit now. This is the last leg of my 3 Ps. And I know that we're far away from profit for those of you who haven't built products yet. But sustainability is about looking to the future. We talked about sustainability and looking into the future. So let's think about how sustainability and sustainable innovation might increase your profits in the future. The greatest fear that people have is that being sustainable is going to be too expensive. I'm a new business owner. I've had this new idea, like I can't afford to do sustainable innovation. But it's not always a money pit. And if you don't believe me, then believe Harvard. So these quotes come from a study of sustainability initiatives of 30 large corporations, and it was published in the Harvard Business Review. This first quote says, our research shows that sustainability is a mother lode of organizational and technological innovations that yield both bottom line and top line returns. They further report that we find that smart companies now treat sustainability as innovation's new frontier. So, how could sustainability help you decrease costs? Well, first, by reducing your inputs. If you use less, it costs less, the bottom line, right? And we were just talking about that in terms of the planet, whether we are driving around for meetings or not, etc. Resource dependency, the less you're dependent on resources, the less it costs. If you find a way, it's like, well, we used to do this in person, we used to do this physically, but now we can do this digitally and it reduces our costs. That's something to keep in mind. Also, you can decrease costs by anticipating consumer demand. So, for example, COVID increased demand for traceability and transparency in the supply chain. Remember, we couldn't get anything in the supply chains. There was like supply chain, and that was supposed to mean that whatever it was you ordered was stuck on a ship somewhere or stuck in a container at the port, and we couldn't get it to you. Well, people who anticipated, right, this customer demand and were able to consolidate their supplier bases, they were prepared for the transition, and that allowed them to decrease their costs. Anyone who was behind the curve was like, oh, snap, right? Like, I wasn't prepared for this. They had to increase their costs, right, to get their things off the containers and to the consumers. But anytime that you can be forward thinking, again, talking about the future again, and anticipate what people might want, then it'll cost you less money in the long run. So some questions to consider, right? Where and by whom was a particular product made? What were the raw materials used in that product? What is the environmental footprint of said product? Customers wanted to know the details about where their products were coming from, right? And if we can see, you can see some of these stickers here. Basically, they're different types of fair trade logos, right? And consumers over time are thinking, you know what? I want to buy something that I know is good for my environment. Now, in the short term, if you were producing something that was not great for the environment because it was cheaper, but then no one wanted to buy what you were building because they knew, right, that you had some suspect supply chain processes or suspect raw material processes, then that's going to cost you money in the long run. But if you're thinking forward to the future, like, hey, like I know people are looking for more sustainable options. I know people are looking for more transparency. Let me go ahead and get some of these certifications now so I can be prepared for the future. That will ultimately help to decrease your costs. And then finally, if you comply with the most stringent compliance rules before they're enforced, then you're going to be ahead of the curve. So this is a throwback story about Hewlett Packard back in the day. In the early 90s, they were like, uh-oh, lead is toxic, and one day government's going to ban lead from all of our products. So they spent a decade trying to figure it out, right? They were working with tin and copper. They developed different chemical agents and talked about oxidization and tarnishing, and they finally figured it out, right? They figured out what their alternative could do, and they were able to put it in place. Now, Europe is oftentimes ahead of us in terms of regulations. So when the European Union's restrictions of hazardous substances came out, HP was already ready, right? They led the path in this new development because they had been thinking about it a decade prior. So I don't know how many of you heard that the iPhone 14 was emitting too many radio frequencies, and there were some European countries that have banned it for that reason. The United States was like, oh, it's fine. I don't know about you, but I feel like it's a little suspect. If it's not fine in Europe, it probably shouldn't be fine for the United States, right? So if I were Apple, if I were on the sustainable innovation team, I'd be like, okay, if Europe is saying this is problematic, then maybe we need to change the frequencies that are emitted from all of our phones moving forward, because these regulations will be put into place one day. I'm sure many of you know that Newsom is signing all kinds of bills. Like, he's just every day in the news, he's signed something else, right? Yesterday, he signed a bill limiting certain additives in food products. Now, these food products were, the additives were restricted from being used in cosmetics several years ago, but we can still have them in our food. Listen, y'all, I'm not even going to talk about how outrageous that is. but Newsom signed a law saying, oh, if they're not good enough for cosmetics, then they shouldn't be good enough for our foods. That law goes into full effect in 2027. So if I was building a product, if I was building foods, right, that had these additives in them, yesterday, I need to figure out how to take those additives out so that I can still be in the market in 2027. The compliance regulations are coming. In this sense, we know they're coming. But there are companies, again, in Europe that have already started making the same products without those additives. So anytime you can be ahead of the curve, pay attention to the news, pay attention to European regulations in whatever realm you might be building something, right? And again, Dr. Galvez asked a good question. Okay, well, what if you're not building a physical product? What if it's a service? Well, those GDP regulations that came out like from Europe about privacy on the web has changed the way we all use the web, right? Now you get to click the button to manage your cookies. You can't really manage them, but there's a button here that says you could try if you want, because those websites are available in Europe, and Europe has new privacy standards that we don't have in the United States. But we all had to be compliant on our web pages because of these international rules. So whether you're building a physical product or whether you're offering a service or experience, these compliance rules still apply. Okay? And you need to know what they are so that you're not behind the curve, because if you don't make the changes when changes are supposed to be made and someone sues you, that could be the very end of your business. So keep that in mind. Okay, we might be able to increase our profits by improving our reputation. Now, you might be one of these consumers, I know I am, but when I feel included and I feel like the company cares a little bit about me and my well-being, I'm more loyal. I'll support that brand. I'll pay a little extra because I believe that brand is trying to do their best by their customers, right? And so you want those loyal customers. You want those customers to tell other people, hey, you should try 7th generation because it cleans just as well and it doesn't smell like poison, right? Yes, is it a couple dollars more? Sure, but it might be better for your health, your children's health, your pet's health as you're cleaning things around your house. Maybe through sustainable innovation, you're developing a better product. You're developing an aspirin that actually solves sustaining life problems or sustaining the earth problems. And people recognize, yeah, this product is better. This service is better because it's solving these particular problems. Again, when it comes to a service or experience, if yours is better, maybe it's because it's more inclusive. Maybe it's because when you're consulting for someone, you take people into account more so than any other consulting service. Maybe the people who are represented on your website represent different ethnicities, different abilities, different ages, and people are more inclined to hire you than to hire someone else that just has a bunch of older white men who are wearing suits and blue ties, right? You can increase your profits by being a best performer. Again, if you can show that the way you use your supply chain and who you're using along the supply chain is diverse in general, is healthier for the environment, people will want to work with you, not just your consumers, but other people along the road on the supply chain. Maybe a warehouser will be more inclined to warehouse your product because they know where your product is coming from and they know that it's sustainably sourced. Maybe they know that your product is being sustainably sourced by people of color in an impressed environment where you're helping to do economic uplift, right? So these tiny decisions that you're making along the way about where you're going to get your products from, where you're going to store them, how you're going to ship them, if you're conscious all the way through, that can make you a best performer. And a lot of people want to support you just because you're being conscientious. The same thing applies to your employees, right? If you have a team and employees, and again, they know that you care about people, planet, and profit, they're going to be more willing to ride for you as opposed to if you just care about profit. Maybe you have one of those jobs, right? Where you know the people in charge only care about making money and they don't care about you at all, right? That means you just go to that job because you have to, but you're not giving them no extra. You're not working after you clock out. You're not working on your weekends. You're not responding to emails because you don't feel good in the environment, right? But if you create an environment where people not only want to work for you, but they want to do the work because the work is bettering themselves or contributing to a good cause or making the world a better place, they're going to give you 110% and you don't even have to ask for it. You also might be able to create new opportunities. You might create new business products and services accidentally because you're supporting people, planet, and increasing your profits. So for example, Cisco, back in the day, designated a recycling group as a business unit, and they set up some clear objectives. They had a P&L account, and as a result, they started to reuse more of their equipment. And their recycling costs fell by 40%, and that new recycling division contributed $100 million to the company's bottom line within 3 years, right? So again, whoever was in charge of the initiative was like, well, let's just try this and see what happens. Now, do I expect any of y'all to make $100 million next year without a product idea today? No. But what if we created a spinoff business that you decided to pivot to, or that someone else in your family is going to run, that makes you the same amount you were making in your primary business, but it was just accidental. You just did the right thing and realized, oh snap, people want to do this. Or maybe let's say that you have a food business, right? And so you're making food, right? You're making your food sustainable. You're very conscious about where you're sourcing your food ingredients. You're very conscious about who you hire to make your food. You've got a food truck situation. Your food truck is popping, right? Everybody wants to come to your food truck. Well, maybe now as a service, you're like, wait, I know how to do sustainable food development. Like, people might pay me to show them how to do the same thing. I wasn't thinking about that when I started my food truck, but now I have a consulting service business that allows me to show other people how to do sustainable food truck development. Boom, right? You might be able to expand your existing company. Maybe that's just by adding different services, right? Or maybe that's doing something different. So the first year of Wisconsin's e-waste take-back program, they created at least 2 new companies because they had so much collection from their take back and they had so many financial benefits. So their existing companies expanded. They created 2 new companies. They added a bunch more shifts. They added lots of employees, and they were able to hire more local haulers to support their growth, right? So again, yes, that's absolutely bigger than we're going to be right now, but I need you to know that it's possible. You don't know what you won't know in the future. These are unknown unknowns that could be beneficial for everyone in terms of new opportunities. And then again, new opportunities to employ more people. If you've got a new business, if you've got a new service, if you expand your existing company, then there are more people then that have the opportunity who want to work with you, not just for you, but work with you because you're doing the right thing and they support your vision. So I invite all of you to keep calm and innovate sustainably. My big piece of advice is to think about the future that you want for people, the planet, and profit in your ecosystem, and then work backwards from there, right? Think about where you want to go in the future when you build a thing, and then work backwards to make it happen. So the professor and me can't help it, even though we're at the end of the presentation. I'd like to ask all of you that are on the call to use the chat to type in one personal action item that you're going to take away from this presentation. So whether it's building a product for the future, or whether it's just how you might shift things in your own life when it comes to interacting with people, the planet, and profit, there's one thing you can drop in the chat, personal action item that you would take away from this presentation. Please drop that now. And I am open to any questions, comments that you might have. Feel free to find me on the interwebs, Instagram at the Utley Experience, Ebony Utley on LinkedIn. Happy to be connected and stay in touch. Oh, good. Recycling paper and pens. Awesome. Awesome.
And people feel free to come off mute as well if that works better for you.
Yes, please. Keeping the idea in mind that sustainability means different things to different people at different places at different times. Yes, awesome. Thinking more about the planet. Yes, good. Less about recycling and more about reducing, reusing, refurbishing, regifting. Absolutely. Sweet. Anything else? Anything about anything? I believe that I'm right on time in my 70 minutes here. And I know Dr. Galvez has some announcements to make, so I will stop sharing screen, but I will still hang out for a little bit in case anything else comes to mind.
Thank you, Dr. Utley, and I did catch that presentation. So when everybody gets a copy of the presentation, you will get the updated one that says sustainable innovation, so that you don't get confused in terms of like the topic and any materials related. So today's session, I do have a couple of announcements. We have something called Delta Plus, which is essentially your feedback. We want to know what worked, what you liked about the sessions. It could be the topics, logistics, run of show, and also what you would like to see improved for next session. So we do have a document, and I am going to drop it in the chat for everybody. You will get a recap email either tomorrow or Friday with all of the materials, as well as the link for our Delta Plus sheet. But make sure that you write your pluses on the left-hand column, and then anything that you would like to change or improve or any feedback on the right-hand side. And then in addition to that, we will have communication. So like I said, we will be emailing you all of the content from today, any recaps. If Dr. Utley would like to share some of her slide deck to share with you all, you will have the recording as well. And so don't worry about not being able to take enough notes, or if you have questions, you can always go back to the recording and replay it. Dr. Utley will be joining us again for the next session, which is persuasive pitching, and that is going to be November 1st. Same time, same day on a Wednesday, November 1st, from 1 to 2:30. And here it is. I'm going to stay behind for another 15 minutes if anybody has questions. But other than